Lily had always dreamed of a perfect wedding. But on the eve of her big day, a message from an unknown number shattered everything she thought she knew about love. As the church bells rang, she walked down the aisle, her heart heavy with betrayal, knowing one truth: today would not be the start of her fairy tale. It would be the beginning of her revenge. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Lily had always dreamed of the perfect wedding. Like most girls, she had imagined the big day since she was young. In her mind, it was always a beautiful scene, surrounded by loved ones, in a grand hall, with twinkling lights and of course the man of her dreams by her side. The thought of walking down the aisle dressed in a sparkling white gown made her feel like a princess. She was going to marry Mark, the love of her life, and everything seemed perfect. They had been dating for 6 wonderful years. Their relationship felt like a fairy tale. They had met in college and had been inseparable ever since. They shared so many memories, laughed together, and supported each other through thick and thin. Mark wasn't just her boyfriend, he was her best friend. They had talked about their future, about getting married, and about building a life together. Lily thought they were a team and nothing could come between them. When Mark proposed, Lily felt like her dream had finally come true. The engagement was everything she had hoped for: romantic, heartfelt, and full of love. Mark had made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. They talked about their wedding day, choosing the colors, the flowers, and the music. They agreed on a traditional wedding, one where they would invite all their friends and family. It would be the perfect celebration of their love. As the months passed, Lily and Mark made all the necessary plans. They picked a venue, designed invitations, and selected the food. Everything was falling into place and Lily was overjoyed. She couldn't wait for the day when she would walk down the aisle and say "I do" to Mark. It was going to be the happiest day of her life. But as the wedding day approached, Lily began to feel a strange unease. Something wasn't right, though. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. There was a little voice in the back of her mind that whispered that things were too perfect. She shook it off, thinking it was just pre-wedding jitters. After all, who wouldn't feel nervous before the biggest day of their life? On the night before the wedding, Lily was surrounded by her bridesmaids. They were in her room, laughing and chatting as they prepared for the big day. Her friends were excited and their enthusiasm helped lift her spirits. They were all getting ready for bed when Lily's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. She frowned, not recognizing the number, but curiosity got the best of her. She opened the message. As she read, her heart began to race. The words on the screen made her feel as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. It was a message about Mark, a message that revealed something she never expected. The text was about his infidelity, about a betrayal that hit her like a ton of bricks. The shock was almost too much to bear. Mark had been seeing someone else. Lily's hands trembled as she scrolled through the message, reading the details. The text was graphic, and each word felt like a punch to her stomach. She couldn't believe it. Mark, the man she had trusted with her heart, had betrayed her. How could he? How could he do this to her, especially now, just hours before their wedding? Everything she had believed in, everything she had hoped for, felt like it was falling apart in an instant. Lily's mind was spinning. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, confusion. She wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but she couldn't find the words. Her bridesmaids noticed her sudden change in demeanor and rushed over to her. They could see the shock on her face, the way her hands were shaking. They immediately asked her what was wrong. "Lily, what's happening? What's wrong?" One of her friends asked, her voice full of concern, but Lily couldn't speak. All she could do was show them the message on her phone. As the words sank in, her friends' faces turned to anger. They were furious on her behalf. How could Mark do this to her? They wanted to march straight to the church and confront him, right then and there. But Lily, though devastated, didn't want to do anything rash. She knew she needed time to think. Time to process what had just been revealed to her. This was the man she was supposed to marry. the man she thought she would spend the rest of her life with. How could he betray her like this? Her mind raced, with questions. Should she call off the wedding? Should she confront Mark right now, or should she wait? Everything seemed like a blur, and she couldn't make sense of it all. Her world felt like it had suddenly crumbled, and she didn't know what to do. As the hours passed, Lily tried to calm herself down. She knew she couldn't let her emotions take control. She had to think clearly. Despite her heartbreak, despite the overwhelming urge to cancel everything, she decided she would go through with the wedding. After all, the venue was paid for, the guests were arriving, and her family was expecting the day to be perfect. She didn't want to disappoint anyone, even though she felt like her world was falling apart. Lily made the decision to keep everything normal, at least on the outside. She would wear the dress, smile, and pretend that everything was fine. She would save the confrontation for later. She would wait for the right moment, when she could take control of the situation and make the decisions that were best for her. The wedding day was coming, and Lily wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But one thing was certain. The woman walking down the aisle that day wouldn't be the same woman who had walked into the wedding preparations. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye. And as Lily prepared for the wedding, she knew that her life was about to take a turn she never saw coming. The morning of the wedding arrived, and Lily was far from the excited bride she had imagined herself to be. Instead of feeling joy and anticipation, she felt a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. The reality of what she had just discovered, Mark's betrayal, weighed on her heart, making it almost impossible to concentrate. As she stood in front of the mirror adjusting her veil and dress, she couldn't help but feel like a stranger in her own life. Her bridesmaids were buzzing around her, helping her get ready, but Lily could barely hear them. Their excitement seemed to belong to someone else, someone who wasn't trapped in the pain of betrayal. She caught glimpses of her reflection in the mirror, and all she could see was a woman on the verge of breaking, forced to wear a mask of happiness for the sake of the people around her. Her phone was still buzzing with notifications, but Lily didn't have the strength to check them. The message from the unknown number still haunted her mind. It had shattered everything she had believed in about Mark, about their relationship. She had spent 6 years with him, sharing dreams and building a future together. How could he have done this? How could he have lied to her for so long? As the minutes ticked by, Lily found herself retreating into her thoughts. The other bridesmaids were excitedly discussing last-minute details, but Lily was lost in the whirlwind of emotions raging inside her. Every time she thought of Mark, her stomach twisted. She kept replaying the conversation she had with him a few days before when everything seemed perfect. Had he been lying to her then too? How could she have been so blind? Her friends, noticing the change in her demeanor, kept asking her if she was okay. They tried to reassure her, telling her that everything would be fine, that the wedding would go smoothly. But Lily wasn't sure how to answer. How could she say that everything was fine when her world had been turned upside down? She wanted to tell them the truth, to explain how she had discovered Mark's infidelity, but something stopped her. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear, but she couldn't bring herself to reveal the secret that was now consuming her. She thought about calling off the wedding. Deep down, she knew it was the right thing to do. But the thought of disappointing her family, of canceling the day that everyone had been looking forward to, was too much to bear. Her parents had already spent so much money on the wedding, and everyone had been waiting for this moment for so long. How could she be the one to ruin it? As the time for the ceremony drew closer, Lily found herself becoming more and more anxious. She didn't know what to expect. Part of her wanted to run away, to escape from everything and everyone, but another part of her knew that she had to face Mark, to confront him and figure out what to do next. But how could she face him knowing what she now knew? How could she walk down the aisle and marry the man who had betrayed her? The emotional turmoil was overwhelming. She felt trapped between two choices: to cancel everything and walk away from the man she thought she loved, or to go through with the wedding and pretend that nothing had changed. Neither option felt right, and Lily didn't know which path to take. She tried to calm her nerves by breathing deeply, but it didn't help. She kept thinking about the message on her phone, the graphic details of Mark's affair. How could he have been so careless, so reckless with her trust? The anger was starting to bubble up inside her, but it was mixed with deep sadness. How could she ever look at him the same way again? In the midst of her confusion, Lily's mind kept drifting back to the good times. She thought about their first date, the way Mark had made her laugh, the late-night talks, and the dreams they had shared. It was hard to reconcile that sweet, loving man with the one who had betrayed her so completely. Had it all been a lie? Was it possible that everything they had built together was nothing more than a facade? The uncertainty was unbearable. Lily didn't know what to believe anymore. She couldn't even trust her own judgment. The life she had imagined for herself was slipping through her fingers, and all she could do was watch as everything unraveled. She was torn between wanting to fight for her relationship and wanting to let it go. She wanted to believe that this was just a bad moment, that Mark could change. But deep down, she knew the truth. Trust once broken was hard to rebuild. The day was moving forward and Lily was being swept along with it. She couldn't stop it, and part of her didn't know if she even wanted to. She was filled with a strange sense of numbness, like she was disconnected from everything happening around her. She went through the motions of getting ready, of walking down the aisle, but her mind was elsewhere, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't control. When she finally reached the altar, standing next to Mark, her heart pounded in her chest. He smiled at her, and for a moment she almost believed that everything was okay. But then the reality hit her again. This man, the one who was supposed to love her and protect her, had broken her heart, and she couldn't pretend any longer. The smile she gave him was a lie, a mask that hid the storm raging inside her. As the ceremony continued, Lily felt like she was drowning. Her emotions were suffocating her, and she couldn't focus on anything other than the hurt and confusion. She was supposed to be the happiest woman in the world, but instead, she was filled with sadness and uncertainty. The life she had dreamed of, the life she thought she was about to step into, seemed like a distant memory. Everything had changed in a single moment, and now, she wasn't sure what the future held. The wedding day had arrived, and Lily felt like she was living in a dream she couldn't control. The morning was supposed to be filled with excitement and joy, but instead, she found herself drifting through the motions like an actress performing a role she didn't want to play. The weight of what she had learned the night before was too heavy to ignore. Mark, the man she had trusted with her heart, had betrayed her, and she was supposed to marry him today. Everything felt wrong. As she stood in front of the mirror looking at herself in the wedding dress she had dreamed of wearing for years, Lily barely recognized the woman staring back. Her makeup was perfect, her hair in place, but her eyes were hollow, clouded with confusion and hurt. Her friends were bustling around her, chatting excitedly, but all Lily could think about was the betrayal, the painful reality she could no longer escape. The room was filled with the buzz of anticipation. Her bridesmaids were helping each other, with their dresses, and the scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. But none of it felt real to Lily. It was as if she was watching everything from a distance, disconnected from the joy that surrounded her. She could hear her friends' laughter, but it didn't touch her. Her mind was consumed by the message she had received the night before. Every word in that text had burned itself into her memory, and she couldn't erase it. Her phone was still silent on the dresser, but she didn't need to check it again. The truth was already clear. Mark had been unfaithful. The man she had been preparing to marry had betrayed her trust in the worst possible way. She had thought their love was something unbreakable, something real, but now it seemed like it was all just a lie. Lily felt a knot in her stomach as the time for the ceremony drew closer. She had always pictured walking down the aisle with a heart full of love, ready to start a new chapter with the man of her dreams. But now, the idea of marrying Mark felt impossible. How could she stand beside him, say her vows, and promise to love him forever when everything she knew about their relationship had been shattered? But then the other side of her brain kicked in. Her family was counting on her. Her friends were waiting for the celebration. Everyone had put so much effort into making this day perfect. The venue was beautiful, the guests were excited, and Lily didn't want to disappoint them. She didn't want to let down her parents, who had already spent so much money on the wedding, or her bridesmaids, who had been planning this day with her for so long. There was no turning back now. The ceremony began and Lily took her first steps toward the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. Mark stood at the front, looking at her with a wide smile, clearly excited. He looked so happy, so confident, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed. But then Lily remembered the message. She remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the hurt. How could she look at him the same way again? How could she marry a man who had broken her heart so completely? As she walked down the aisle, Lily forced herself to keep her composure. She smiled, but it felt like a mask, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She could hear the murmurs from the guests as she approached the altar, their eyes on her. But all she could focus on was Mark, the man she was supposed to marry, the man who had betrayed her. When she reached the front, Mark took her hand and smiled at her, his eyes full of love. Lily smiled back, but it felt like a lie. She was standing there, holding his hand. And yet, she felt more alone than ever. Everything about this moment was wrong. She could hear her friends and family in the background, their excited whispers and smiles. But all Lily could feel was the weight of the secret between her and Mark. The secret he didn't even know she knew. The ceremony continued, and it was time for Mark to read his vows. His voice trembled with emotion as he spoke, promising to love and cherish Lily for the rest of their lives. Lily couldn't help but feel a sharp pang in her chest as he spoke the words. They were beautiful words, but they didn't feel real. How could they? How could Mark stand there, saying all these things when he had betrayed her? How could he speak of love and loyalty when he had been anything but loyal? When it was her turn to speak, Lily froze. The words she had prepared seemed meaningless now. She had wanted to say something beautiful, something that would reflect the love she thought they shared. But now, all she could think about was the pain, the betrayal, and the truth she could no longer ignore. Her hands shook as she held the bouquet and she looked down at her phone, which she had brought with her to the altar. She took a deep breath, and in that moment something inside her snapped. Instead of reading her vows, Lily looked up at Mark, her voice shaking as she spoke. "There will be no wedding today," she said, her words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. There was a stunned silence in the room. Guests exchanged confused looks and Mark's smile faltered. Lily pulled out her phone and began to read the text messages aloud. The words were brutal, graphic, and raw. They were the messages Mark had sent to the woman he had been seeing behind Lily's back. With each word she read, the room seemed to shrink. The truth was out in the open, and the silence that followed was deafening. Mark stood there, speechless, his face draining of color as the realization hit him. Lily had discovered his betrayal, and now, in front of all their friends and family, he had been exposed. The crowd watched in shock, some with sympathy for Lily, others with disbelief at the turn of events. For Lily, the moment was bittersweet. As painful as it was to expose Mark's secret, she felt a strange sense of relief. The truth had finally come out, and she no longer had to pretend. She wasn't going to marry a man who had betrayed her, and she wasn't going to spend her life pretending everything was okay. As she turned and walked away from the altar, the weight that had been on her shoulders for so long finally began to lift. The wedding was over, but for Lily it was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt free. The silence in the church was deafening as Lily walked away from the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just exposed Mark's betrayal to everyone, their friends, their family, the guests who had come to witness what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The reality of what had just happened hit her in waves, each moment more surreal than the last. She had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Her life was never going to be the same again. Lily's bridesmaids rushed to her side as she made her way toward the exit, her steps heavy with emotion. They were stunned, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Some were still processing the words she had read aloud, trying to grasp the full extent of the betrayal. Others were whispering words of comfort, trying to make sense of the whirlwind that had just unfolded. Lily could hear their voices, but they seemed distant, like an echo in the background of her mind. She was numb, her thoughts clouded with a mixture of anger, sadness, and relief. Outside, the guests were still in shock, unsure of how to react to the sudden and unexpected turn of events. Mark had been left standing at the altar, unable to move, unable to speak. His face was pale, and he looked like he had just been punched in the stomach. He had no idea how to explain himself, no words to offer Lily or anyone else. He was trapped in his guilt, unable to make things right. Lily's mind, however, was already moving forward. As she stepped outside the church, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She had just made the hardest decision of her life, but she had done it for herself. She wasn't going to let Mark's betrayal define her. She wasn't going to let him take away her happiness, her sense of self-worth. She had always imagined this day as the start of her happily ever after. But now she realized that sometimes the happiest moments come after the hardest decisions. She looked at her bridesmaids who were still trying to comfort her, and she smiled. It wasn't a sad smile or a forced one. It was a genuine smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky but strong. "Thank you for being here for me." Her friends nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes. They understood. They knew how hard this was for her, but they also knew that she had just taken control of her life in a way that was brave and empowering. The next few days were a blur for Lily. She had retreated into herself, trying to process everything that had happened. She stayed with her parents for a while, away from the world, away from the media attention that her story had garnered. Her phone was flooded with messages, some from well-meaning friends, some from strangers who had heard her story and wanted to offer support. But Lily didn't want to talk to anyone. She just needed time to heal, time to figure out what came next. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Mark, who had been silent and distant since the wedding, reached out to Lily. At first, she didn't want to speak to him. She was angry, hurt, and didn't think she could ever trust him again. But he kept trying. He sent her text after text, apologizing, begging for a chance to explain himself. He even showed up at her parents' house, standing outside her door, looking broken and desperate. Finally, after several days of silence, Lily agreed to meet with him. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but she knew that she needed to hear him out, if only to have closure. They met at a small cafe, a neutral place where neither of them felt overwhelmed by emotions. Mark looked different from the man she had known. His face was drawn and his eyes were filled with regret. He was no longer the confident, self-assured man she had once loved. Now, he looked like someone who had lost everything. "Lily, I'm so sorry," Mark said, his voice trembling. "I don't even know how to explain what happened. I made a terrible mistake. I was selfish and I hurt you in ways that I can never take back." Lily sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She listened to him, but she wasn't sure if she could believe anything he said. His apology sounded sincere, but she had heard those words before and they had meant nothing. "You hurt me more than I ever thought possible, Mark," Lily said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I trusted you with everything, and you broke that trust. You chose someone else over me, and I can't just forget that. I can't just move on from it." Mark nodded, his head hanging in shame. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me, not now, maybe not ever. But I want you to know that I've changed. I've spent these days thinking about everything I've done, and I realize now how much I've lost. You were everything to me, Lily, and I threw it all away." Lily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She wasn't sure if she could ever trust him again, but part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her wanted to believe that people could change, that mistakes could be forgiven. But another part of her knew that she couldn't go back to the life she had once dreamed of. Too much had happened and too much had changed. "Mark, I don't know what the future holds," Lily said, her voice calm but firm. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had, but I do know that I'm stronger now. I've learned that I don't need you to be happy. I can find my own happiness, and I will." As Lily walked away from Mark that day, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't the peace of a fairy tale ending, but it was the peace of knowing that she had made the right choice for herself. Mark had apologized, and maybe, just maybe, he could change. But for Lily, it was too late. She had already started her journey toward healing, and she was no longer waiting for anyone to define her happiness. She was in control of her own future.